morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I know we're all around the world in different places. I'm going to share my screen so you can start seeing some slides here. Um, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions at the end and having a dialogue about circular economy. So let me just give you a brief overview of this short talk. We'll start with a little bit of analysis of why the circular economy and the advantage to business in pursuing the circular economy. We'll then go into 5 circular business models that are really the crux of what business can and is pursuing to advance circular economy principles as part of core strategy. Those will include small case examples of businesses that have pursued one or more of the 5 business models I'll discuss. And then if there's time, or perhaps woven into the Q&A, we will have an opportunity to go a little deeper in a couple of case studies. Google and Hewlett-Packard Inc., who have both pursued circular economy in a pretty holistic and deep way. So we may integrate that into Q&A, or there may be a little bit that we can include in the 20-minute presentation, depending on how time flows. So let's start with the circular economy advantage. One thing I wanted to start with is a quote from Jane Jacobs, who's an urban philosopher and has thought a lot about the nature of economies. She says, the more different means a system possesses for recapturing, using, and passing around energy before it's discharged from the system, the larger are the cumulative consequences of the energy it receives. That may sound like a complex statement, but it really is simple in principle. And it really means that when we get energy, the planet getting energy from the sun, our investment in what we're doing, when we give energy to something, the more we can continue to keep that energy in the system, the more productive we can be. And right now, the way we have been living here in the linear economy has not been doing that. We have been wasting a lot of energy in the system. We've been letting a lot of the energy out, and therefore not being as efficient as we could be, not being as productive as we can be. What we've been doing is kind of adopting a take, make, waste model for our economy, where we take natural resources from the earth, we make things that we need and want, and then we dispose of them often before the end of their natural life cycle when there's still a lot of embedded value. And this leads to a lot of waste. What this talk is about is really shifting our traditional model of a take, make, waste economy to one of a circular economy that will allow that energy in our system to stay and continue to be used and to be productive. It's really about rethinking waste as we see in natural systems. I wanted to provide this perspective on the Amazon rainforest. It's true for a lot of natural ecological systems. In fact, all healthy ecological systems. There is no waste. Waste is just sort of resources not yet put to use. And so, for example, in the rainforest, there are all of the connections of the species and critical species. Down here in the bottom right, you see the decomposers and detritus feeders. These are the fungi and the bacteria. I was just actually last week taking a group of corporate leaders in sustainability from Apple, from Amazon, Microsoft, Patagonia, NRG, energy company, McDonald's, Estee Lauder, quite a number, to the proven Amazon, in fact. And one of the analogies that one person said is, we are, as the sustainability leaders in our company, we are like the fungi and bacteria. We're sort of the non-charismatic species, but without us, the system does not remain or stay or become productive. And so what these animals do in a natural ecosystem is they convert all of the wasted material, whether it's animal waste or plant litter that falls to the forest floor, into nutrients that can be taken up by the system. They are core to the circularity of the rainforest system. And this is what we want to start thinking about in business, is how do we really rethink waste and our role as leaders in these companies to think about how do we close some of these loops and create greater circularity and connection. So you may have seen something similar to this. This is from Accenture, and it's a log plot analysis of our linear economy, how we have over time pursued a path of using resources, natural resources, to drive economic development. And while this may have worked for a certain period of time, what we're recognizing now is there's no way we can continue on this path. There are 2.5 billion new consumers to join the middle class by 2030. Pursuing this kind of path of intensive resource use to fuel economic development would simply require 3 planets to do so by about 2050. what we're also seeing economically is that there's been a shift after about 2000. Before, despite this kind of growth path where we were using resources intensively, as we grew, as GDP grew, we were seeing actually commodity prices going down, giving us an economic indicator that maybe they weren't scarce. Now, this of course doesn't factor in all the externalities and the costs of using resources the way we did and the subsidies, et cetera. But without those, it looked like things were okay until about 2000. After 2000, what we started seeing is that with every 1% growth in GDP, rather than falling, the commodity price index went up by 1.5%, indicating even with out factoring in all the externalities, that commodities were becoming more and more expensive, that we might need to rethink our traditional way of doing business. And what's happened is that we have just then become more and more in a VUCA world, a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which requires us to think very differently about the way we're doing business. And that's why circular economy is such a powerful concept, because it offers a way to think about economic development or growth decoupled from the use of scarce resources. That is the principal concept, which is the principal threat to our well-being right now. And so embedded in this is that we need disruptive technology and business models, and I will talk about 5 of those business models in a moment, based on longevity of products, renewability, their reuse, the potential to repair them, to upgrade them, refurbish them, to share capacity. So moving from a place of thinking about individual ownership to sharing, and dematerialization. To what extent can we convert products to services? Can we dematerialize the things that we need? And so this shift from linear to circular really represents a cultural paradigm shift. It represents a move from ownership and consumption, thinking about how do we own things individually and consume them, to just wanting access. We don't necessarily need to own things if we can access the service they provide, which then shifts us from a focus on products and production to services and sharing. A focus on a shift from designing for obsolescence to designing for longer life. We no longer want a business model that's trying to produce products that go out of function quickly so that consumers buy more and more. We can't operate that way. We need to design for longer life and capture value by pursuing that kind of a business model. And that means we're shifting from looking at waste to resources not yet put to use. There really is no waste. It's just a matter of how to understand waste and see what the use is for that waste. And then again, this is a really important one, I think, instead of thinking about doing less bad, how do we lessen our carbon footprint or do a little less social or environmental harm? It's really thinking about how do we do more good? How do we turn our entire strategy towards productive use? So yes, of course, minimizing waste, but really also thinking about how do we do more good in the world? How do we turn our entire strategy towards productive contribution? So before we get into the potential of the circular economy, we really need to look at waste. And this provides a 4-dimensional view. Again, this was inspired by Accenture. This analysis of looking at sort of a $4.5 billion opportunity if we start capturing all of this lost resource and putting it to productive use. So if you look on the left upper quadrant, you see if you think about sourcing and manufacturing and even a bit of logistics, we have tremendous wasted resources, estimated to be 1.7 trillion in how we are sourcing materials and manufacturing. If you look at just even agriculture, only 40% of irrigation water actually ever reaches crops. We're not using renewable energy or bio-based fuels in the ways we can. We're using chemicals and materials that have a lot of cost. And then if you shift to the upper right quadrant, wasted capacity, there's just simply a lot of materials that aren't put to full use. If we increased sharing, co-owning, co-using, or resource pooling, we could capture a lot of value there from current waste. And then finally, bottom right corner, wasted life cycles, where we are basically disposing of products that still have a lot of value. They're not at their natural life. We are just finished with them. And so how can we find ways where we may be finished with things, but reselling them to others who could benefit or use them, or repairing and remanufacturing so they can be kept in use, their life cycle can be extended. And then bottom left quadrant, $1.3 trillion of opportunity there to capture waste that has to do with reverse logistics, where when we dispose of these products, there are actually values that are embedded in those products that could be harvested, such as rare earth metals when we think about disposing of technology. So let's just look at what some folks are saying about the scope of the circular economy. Accenture, based on this analysis that I just shared with you, estimates it to be worth $4.5 trillion by 2030. The European Union, obviously investing heavily in this. Many of you are from Europe. The US is behind, I think in part because we have so much more land for the number of people and aren't feeling the crunch as much in terms of space. But the EU is in 2016, circular activities such as repair, reuse, or recycling generated almost 147 billion euros in value added. ING, large financial services company, says even in the US, the focus on sustainability is intensifying, and that we've got, just in 1 year, twice as many US firms embedding sustainability into strategic decision-making, including circular economy. So what we're seeing is that businesses are really starting to recognize the competitive advantage through pursuing circular economy. This isn't about a charitable act or a public measure to improve relations with customers. It's really about growth, a multi-billion-dollar opportunity from financing the circular economy and meeting new customers through that growth. Profitability, huge cost reductions in that elimination of waste and introduction of circular economy principles. And finally, sustainability and trust. By closing the loop on materials and products to create supply chain security, there's a real opportunity to enhance customer relations and also improve the long-term viability of supply chains. So let's move to 5 circular business models now and look at a few case examples of how companies are actually putting this into practice. Circular supply chain will be the first, then we'll talk a little bit about recovery and recycling, product life extension, sharing platforms, and using products as services. So Ecovative Design is a fascinating company started by 2 young men, which has now grown into a multi-million-dollar business. And the basis of the concept was really using a circular supply chain, starting with natural materials as the basis of their product. So they use agricultural waste combined with fungal mycelium to produce basically mushroom materials, which are intended to be packaging of the future. This is to replace styrofoam pellets, other packaging that we use that's plastic-based, but is also now being used in furniture, insulation materials, and right now is cost competitive with those materials. Looks to be, based on their projections, that once they get to scale a bit further, it will be about 30% less expensive than a lot of the competitive current materials. So recovery and recycling. This is a huge and important business model. And the idea here as I go through these 5 is to recognize that depending on where you are with your business and what your business is doing, one or more of these models probably suits you best. And in entering the circular economy, it really makes sense to do that kind of an analysis to see where is the greatest material benefit for you and what makes the most sense to start. Over time, it may likely be that all 5 of these business models become relevant and important in your business, but starting with the ones that seem to have maybe lower hanging fruit and the most material benefit initially. So in terms of recovery and recycling, a very interesting example is how Ford has started partnering with Novelis. They installed $60 million in scrap handling equipment that allowed them to separate aluminum alloy scraps after manufacturing various Ford vehicles. They were then able to ship the shredded scrap to Novelis, a plant there where Novelis could process that scrap metal, which was otherwise disposed of, into aluminum sheets and coils that Ford then was able to use in their new vehicles. Interface, a billion-dollar carpet manufacturer, the largest manufacturer in the world of carpet tiles, which we have in our offices, they use nylon from discarded fishing nets to make carpet. You may know about the ocean plastics crisis that we're facing. A significant portion of ocean plastics is discarded fishing equipment and nets that are just left in the ocean. So they found a way to put use to those. And they also use recycled PVB from building glass and car windscreens to replace the latex in carpet tiles, which has reduced their carbon footprint by about 80%. And so this is glass from shattered windscreens that has normally been disposed. There's been no market for it. But they actually realized that because of the anti-shattering material that was in there, which kept it from being recycled, it was actually exactly what they needed to replace latex in their carpet tiles. So again, a wasted resource, not really waste, just a resource not yet put to use. They've found a use for it and are now incorporating it and created a global market for it. Moving on to product life extension, remanufacturing is a really key opportunity that BMW, as one example, has taken advantage of. They have developed remanufacturing capacity for their generator, their starter, water pump, and automatic transmission. This allows them to provide a second life cycle for the BMW parts that they've invested in. There's obviously rigorous quality control that's required in order to do this because these parts are so central to the functioning and safety of the vehicles. But by doing that with rigorous quality control, they've decreased waste disposal by about 70% since 2006. Caterpillar has pursued a similar path. They have built a global network of remanufacturing facilities. They've taken back over 2.2 million end-of-life units. So they've got a way of getting these units back. They then remanufacture, and they have, to this point, remanufactured over 161 million pounds of material with huge energy savings. Remanufacturing actually requires significantly less energy than new production, up to 95% less energy. So it obviously reduces waste and also the need for virgin resources, which with volatile supply chains and scarcity of resources is a huge advantage. Finally, shifting products to services. This goes back to the principle I talked about early on in terms of how do we think more about consumers wanting to access services? They don't necessarily care about owning these things. And so can we as businesses start thinking about how do we think differently about what we offer and think about, is there a way to do it as a service? And what might be the advantages, not just to consumers, but to us in doing so? So Michelin provides an interesting example. They've started selling tires as a service rather than as a product. So consumers now pay for miles driven. If there's a puncture, they just get a different tire, they're paying for the miles driven. By leasing the tires, Michelin controls the product and has an incentive to build long-lasting tires. This goes back to my earlier point also about shifting to, not designing for obsolescence, but building for longevity. So if you're controlling the product and you're 100% responsible for the product and you're just leasing it, you really want to build a product that's going to last. You also want to build a product that you understand is serving the needs of customers. And by having a leasing model, you get a lot of feedback from the customers you're in relationship with, because when the tires come back and there's something wrong with them, or you're in contact with the customers because you're leasing, not just selling, you can continue to innovate and decide how to improve your product. When good tires are returned, they can be released. And then the end of life cycle tires can be recycled. That also means that new products can be built from those playground surfaces, shock absorption, or some of the tires can be converted to fuel, which also means, of course, less dependence on virgin materials. So controlling, again, a bit more of your supply chain, having less risk of volatility there. In the EU and Brazil, Michelin has, through this model, been able to achieve about 97% of recycling rates. Finally, the fifth business model, sharing platform. This really has become possible as we've recognized, as I demonstrated in that earlier log plot, the scarcity of natural resources that we are now facing in our global economy, combined with increased urbanization, more and more people moving to cities, both in the industrialized and developing world, digital platforms that have, of course, blossomed in the last 10 and 20 years, and our natural desire to connect with people. All of these factors has made it possible for the sharing economy to grow dramatically in the last 10 or so years. And as we've seen, slogans like sharing is the new buying, again, emphasizing access over ownership, and not really thinking about mine versus yours, but really ours. How can we move to a much more collaborative and collective way of thinking about accessing the products and services we need and want? This provides, this slide here provides just a brief look at some of the evolution in the sharing economy over the last 20 years or so, with Craigslist early on, starting with online classified advertisements for jobs, allowing people to access items that others might have nearby, and then moving on to Airbnb. When you think about how significant this is, a $30+ billion company that was created with no actual investment in physical infrastructure. phenomenal rental of homes and apartments around the world, and allowing many people to develop independent income and create a business, as I said, a hugely successful and highly valued business that really didn't have significant capital investment. And then TaskRabbit, coming along the heels of Airbnb, a mobile marketplace that outsources small jobs and tasks to neighboring users. So allows people to get work done and find work in a much more fluid and flexible way than was possible before. Moving on to Uber and Lyft, these other ride services that you know of and I'm sure use. Again, allowing idle vehicles to be put in greater use. I think cars are parked about 92% of the time. We have huge wasted capacity there in terms of our vehicles. And then in 2010, Udemy was founded, and really a global marketplace for learning and teaching online, enabling experts to share skills with people who want them. So all of these models are continuing to grow, and the 5 business models are really the crux of the ways in which business is starting to pursue circularity. As I said, the key is to think about where do you have an opportunity to begin, if you haven't already begun, or if you have, maybe deepen a particular model that you may be pursuing, but see how there may be complementarity with some of these other business models. So let me just summarize a few of the key points, and then I'd love to take questions. The circular advantage and 5 circular business models. We talked about, in contrast to the linear economy, the circular economy eliminating waste by closing the loop on production, using renewable resources, and integrating outputs and byproducts into production. And those could be within your own company, or finding a partner like Novelis and Ford, where one of your wasted resources can be an input into their production process, or they can modify it and sell it back to you. Obviously embedded in the circular economy is an embracing of a fundamentally new value system. And that is, we're seeing that shift. Millennials certainly demonstrate that shift. Generation Z demonstrates that shift. But I think even broadly, older generations, like some of us, we are recognizing that we do care more about access than ownership. We are thinking much more long-term as we've become more aware of what's happening in our world. We're attracted by the idea of sharing and decoupling the development of our economy and our society from the use of scarce resources. As I pointed out, the circular economy has enormous financial potential, and engagement is growing globally on this. This is a movement that is happening. We can either get on board and figure it out, or we can sort of find ourselves left behind. And finally, well, not finally, I think there's a couple points, but it offers a competitive advantage for business, and not just in terms of waste reduction or cost reduction, really in terms of areas of growth and opportunity, certainly in terms of customer relations and profitability, in part driven by those customer relations. And then finally, the 5 business models we briefly explored. Circular supply chain, where you're really thinking about, like the Amazon rainforest, all the inputs in your production are ecologically sound, so that there isn't a toxic waste generated. Recovery and recycling, product life extension. How do we really allow our products to be designed and remanufactured for longevity? Shifting products to service models. And then finally, sharing. So with that, I'd love to open the floor up for questions and hear any thoughts or reactions you have.
Thank you, Julia. I think we have one question in the Q&A box. I don't know if you can see the question.
I don't think I can, no. Let's see, I'll try to open the Q&A box here. Which business model do you think is more successful for a business? Okay, good question. I really think this is the key, where the sort of the rubber meets the road, is to understand your business. And you don't have to understand it alone. There are a lot of support out there, groups that are dedicated solely to the circular economy and who can help do that analysis with you. There are the large scale consulting firms like Accenture, who have hundreds of people globally working on circular economy with businesses, trying to do the analysis of where is the greatest material benefit and advantage for your company in pursuing this, and how might you get started based on your business model, your products, your sourcing, the materials that you're using. And that can really help in doing the analysis. In addition to the large consulting firms, there really are a number of NGOs and for-profit companies that are working specifically on circularity, like closed loop partners In Taiwan, I was working with a group of Taiwanese government officials, and there is a circular Taiwan network that has been formed that really is partnering with business and government to think about how to do this together and to analyze opportunities. So depending on where you are, and I'm happy to follow up afterwards, there are resources that could help you look at your business and say, which business model might make the most sense for me? Any other questions? Or simply reactions or experience you've had so far? It'd be interesting to hear.
Yes, we actually have 3 more questions in
Great.
the Q&A box.
Okay, fabulous. Is water waste considered in the circular economy? Yes, absolutely. Any kind of waste. So as we think about using resources, all of them. And so, for example, some companies have been very innovative in thinking about wastewater at their plants, actually designing wetlands around their plants where you have a natural system cleansing that water and recirculating it either back to the manufacturing facility or the company, or putting it back into municipal water systems. There are, of course, other ways to do it, but one thing that a number of companies have found is that using actual natural wetland systems provides a more affordable way than some of the other treatment plant options that they've looked at. So yes, absolutely, water waste is considered. Thank you for the insightful talk. Thank you. Are there more brand examples and case studies you can recommend to read up on? Absolutely. The couple I was going to share, let me just show you a couple of slides here if I can. So Hewlett Packard, let me see here, has done some really interesting work. This is Google. I'll just mention those are the 3 things that they focused on: designing out waste and pollution. And they set a goal of 100% renewable energy, which is huge when you think about the amount of energy Google is using to cool its servers and to power its servers. Keeping products and materials in use. So really thinking about remanufacturing of their servers, maintenance and remanufacturing, designing for longevity. And then when they're done, selling them on a secondary market. And then promoting healthy materials and safe chemistry. They're starting to get into consumer products like the Nest thermostat and things of that nature. And so they're now starting to think much more about what are the materials that are going into these consumer products, and are they sound? Is it a circular supply chain or not? And how can we make it such? They've also thought a lot about their role in overcoming systemic barriers. So just a brief look at this, but they recognize there's poor data and lack of information about the sharing economy. So they're really trying to think about how they can play a kind of facilitating role globally because of their influence in spreading circular economy know-how. They're also trying to showcase successes to inspire action. So this Project Sunroof is a way that anybody can go online using Google Earth, see where their house is located, and get an analysis of the potential for solar on their roof and what it might cost. So it's a way of trying to get people to change their habits and really influence public behavior overall. And then because they are such a scaled company and with so much impact, what they choose to purchase can really influence global markets. So they're really thinking about how they can use their purchasing power on that front. Hewlett Packard, and again, I can provide these materials, but one of the things that they've done that's really fascinating is to think about where do they have, again, this goes back to my point about looking at the materiality. Okay, where do they have the biggest impact? Well, it's their supply chain and their products and solutions. They can't really influence how consumers, what energy people are using in terms of products and solutions. They can, but what they wanted to do is focus in on their supply chain and say, okay, that's a huge carbon footprint. It has to do with materials extraction through manufacturing. Let's think about getting more recycled content into all of our products. This is like, you know, back to some of these other models I shared with Michelin and others, where if you're recapturing resources, you don't have to keep sourcing new and virgin resources. And so they've thought about it across their entire printing ecosystem, from paper to printers to cartridges. What they've done is developed really amazing closed loop recycling, where they break down their printer cartridge materials, incorporate plastic bottles and hangers into the remanufacturing of these print cartridges. And I won't go into they're now doing 1 million bottles a day, by the way, of recycled plastic bottles, which is a huge global problem in terms of the amount of plastic we're generating and is wasted. And I won't go into the details, but this is a case study I can share with you, is what they're doing with Haiti, a very unique project where they're looking at ocean-bound plastic that is not disposed of properly. When heavy rains come, it ends up on the beaches and in the ocean. And they are now very involved in working with Haitian trash and recycled plastic collectors to get these bottles out of the ocean and out of being bound towards the ocean and into recycling facilities, investing significantly in washing lines that will allow the quality of these plastics to be improved so that they can be recycled, and inputs to the print cartridges and laptops that they manufacture. So I am happy to provide some examples after this talk that you can look at to read up further. There are quite a few. I know we're at our time, so I don't know if there's one last question that you'd like to pick, or if we should just sign off, but I really appreciated thoughts and questions and the opportunity to share this with you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Julia, for this presentation and for answering these questions. I would just say that if one of your questions was not answered during the webinar, and if you have any additional question, please email us at marketing@positiveluxury.com, and we will forward them to Julia so she can answer them eventually.
Yeah. One other thing I just might mention, and I think Claudia has already shared this with you, but if you are interested in continuing education on this, at Stanford, we have our Strategies for Sustainability executive program specifically designed for professionals who are working in this space and trying to figure this out. And we have both on-campus programs. Our next one is next September 2020, which really give an opportunity for people to delve deeply and work on hands-on skills related to advancing sustainability in part of their businesses, and also build a global network and connections with Stanford faculty and practitioners in this field. We also have something that's just ready to go at any time for anyone in your company. That's an online course. It's a self-paced, short online course. It takes about 8 hours total, 4 hours of kind of video and learning from practitioners and faculty at Stanford about broad perspectives on sustainability. It is not circular economy focused, I want to say, but it is perspectives on sustainability, incorporation of sustainability into core strategy of business. And so after 4 hours of videos, it's 4 hours of kind of your own reflection time. There's some knowledge checks and some case readings that are part of it. Again, it's self-paced and online anytime. And I've provided that link to Claudia, but if that's a resource that could be helpful, certainly let us know. And if you'd like to talk about it, I'd be happy to.
Yes, and we'll be happy to share the link again with the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for this interesting presentation, Julia. We hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. I enjoyed very much.
Okay,
hope
thank
you all did too. Okay.
Yes,
thank
great.
you.
Thank you, and we'll speak to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.